Hey, what's going on everybody? Obviously this video I'll be giving you guys my last 10 Kendo tips for type soul, since at the moment I feel as if I've learned a lot since last time I made a Kendo tips video. So unless I discover something new or lab up some new tech, I feel this will probably be the last Kendo tips and tricks you can learn in a long while. Anyways, for starters, I want to do some rapid fire facts and stuff about my build, since I've changed a bit since my last Kendo tips video. Now, just looking at the first second of the video, I can already tell you guys not to use overpowering or flowing petals. I've replaced mortal ties for each emoji as well, but that's because I use 65 Kendo, so the mortal ties passive applies there. But I replaced my two other skills with Horizon and Rising Swallow, since I learned how to use Rising Swallow properly, as well as implement it into a tech I've invented with the Murasama a long time ago. Now, as for Horizon, it used to be pretty bad back then, since the damage was ass and the hitbox was ass. But now, not only is the damage and the hitbox improved upon greatly, but the added gimmick where the True Pierce timer lasts for 7 seconds instead of 5 seconds is actually pretty insane. Now, the last thing I want to mention is you should absolutely 1000% use White Dust over Furioso. I just use Furioso for the aura, but White Dust being frame 1 counter and dealing the same amount, if not more damage than Furioso, is pretty insane. Obviously, your opponent can't do anything against the counter if they trigger it, unless they use Let's or Visored, but other than that, Furioso is an incredibly easy move to dodge right now. Now, moving on to the actual tips, our 10th tip will be why you shouldn't use flowing petals or overpowering slash. As I mentioned already, I used to use those two skills back then. Now I fully discarded them for a few reasons. For overpowering slash, it's pretty obvious that unless you use proficiency for the guard break proc, the skill really isn't that great, since the hyper armor is really inconsistent and the damage is only slightly higher than bisection, so you're probably better off just using bisection at that point. Now, as for why I would discard flowing petals has some uses where the first slash is really quick and can easily remove a dodge off someone, pretty much acting as like a nice poke, but you'll never actually see yourself landing this move on actual good players. And although it feels really nice to have a gap closer, it's just not worth using when you'll get punished for attempting to land a second or even follow-up slash. I should also mention that flowing petals takes a huge amount of ray. Like, I'm talking like maybe like half a bar. So if you're just using this whenever you can, you'll probably realize this is why you're running out of ray so quickly. Now, for our 9th tip will be which Murasama weapons to choose from. Now, I would say to use the normal version for a Ronkar, but since the legacy version actually got buffed where the posture damage for the crit and the M1 speed got increased, it might be slightly more viable now, but I still think the weapon isn't really as good as the normal one. For Soul Reaper, I would recommend also using the normal version, since the crit is basically frame 2 up close, and although it can't really do any combos afterward, it's a really easy crit to land for some damage in Soul Style. For Quincy, you're going to want to use the legacy version actually for the cripple, especially since the normal crit is really easy to dodge and punish. Next up, for our 8th tip, it'll be to use Horizon first. As I mentioned before, Horizon has 2 extra seconds of True Pierce time, meaning if you land a vertical or split gate on your opponent within 7 seconds of landing Horizon, you will trigger the True Pierce and deal a ton of damage. Now, some may think it's better to land a vertical down first and then fish out a Horizon after a move or an M1. However, I want to point out that doing Horizon in a vertical will actually do more damage than doing vertical in a Horizon. Obviously, you'll need more effort to actually land a vertical after a Horizon. However, you'll have 2 extra seconds to pull it off, and honestly, I find it easier to land a Horizon in the vertical than the vertical in the Horizon. Next, for our 7th tip is to use delayed crossings as a hyper armor or flash step catching tool. Delayed crossings has a small amount of hyper armor once you actually jump in the air, but using delayed crossings in neutral and getting parried actually puts you in more parry stun than most other moves in the game, meaning if they parry your delayed crossings, they can easily M1 or even Rising Swallow you as punishment. Instead, if they ever do a move like the hold variant of Storm X or Flower Passage or any move with long windup, you should aim to interrupt their move by using delayed crossings as a reliable way of catching them during a move. Next, for our 6th tip is to always bait your Flower Passage. This one might be obvious to some, where if they fight a Hakuda or something with a counter, you should remember to bait out their counter for a punish. However, what I'm actually saying is to always bait your opponent regardless of their skill tree and hit them at the last moment of your Flower Passage. A lot of experienced players can reliably dodge or even parry your Flower Passage, So by getting close enough and baiting a dodge or a parry, you can go in and land your flower passage as it's about to end, and even get a free guard break with a vertical split if you notice them wasting their parry in attempts to parry your flower passage. Now next up for the 5th tip is to take advantage of upgraded Ichimonji cripple. As you may know, Ichimonji at 55 kendo or higher can apply mortal ties on your opponent when you land it. However, it also applies about 2 to 3 seconds of cripple onto your opponent, preventing them from dodging, meaning they can only block and parry your attacks within the 2 to 3 seconds of cripple. So you can easily do something like split gate into an M1 feint into vertical down, and they won't be able to flash step. Next up for my 4th tip is to dash around behind your opponent with several moves. Obviously everyone at this point knows about doing this with Rising Swallow, especially as a way to dodge then counter their attack on something like Dropping Fang or Delayed Crossings. But for this tip, I'm recommending you try this with other skills such as Split Gate, Crescent Relief, and Delayed Crossings. Obviously one reason to do this is to get behind their block so they can't block the attack as easily. Another reason for doing this, especially with something like the Delayed Crossings, is to make your opponent nervous enough to throw off their parry and put them on the defensive. I remember this works especially well if you do this with a move like Flash Fang, where it kind of throws them off a bit and ends up landing since you can't block or dodge in that scenario. Now for my 3rd tip is to stack Horizon after a Crescent Relief. Since Horizon got a hitbox buff, it can actually reach deceptively far away from you, and this is actually enough to reach after catching someone stuck within the Crescent Relief hitbox as they're being dragged away. This is a really simple tip, but unless they parry your Crescent, this is a really good way to follow up or confirm with Horizon. Now for my 2nd tip, I heavily recommend you run Split Gate. If you consistently guard break people with vertical down, but you have Horizon on cooldown, you'll be missing out on half a bar's worth of damage, and some people are okay with that since you can just Rising Swallow instead. However, with the tip I mentioned before about dashing behind your opponent and then having Ichimonji as a good way to set up for a True Pierce, I just can't see a better time than ever to run Split Gate in your kit. Now for the last tip would be to run elements or weapons that can gap close or catch flash steps. Most weapons that come to mind for this goal will be to run most of the Murasama weapons where they have good range or can even cripple your opponent. Other weapons such as Rapier, Scythe, Greatsword, Noidra, which actually got a buff, and Karen are all good weapons that can either lunge or cripple your opponent. As for elements, I would definitely recommend Arrogante, Storm, Death Dealing, Thunderbolt, Benihime, and Ice. All for several reasons, such as Arrogante being able to cripple, Storm for the gap closer and or guard break, Death Dealing and Thunderbolt for disabling flash step, Benihime for being able to feint the seat into a Horizon, and C for the shurikens into Horizon. Also, if you're wondering why I rump Vamp, it's mostly for the posture farm with Payday and the Echo Bites. In any case, these are my 10 master tips for playing Kendo. I know some of these tips are kind of obvious or even a repeat from before, but I felt that a refresh was needed on what to run these days in order to help show you guys an updated way to play in Kendo. Do note that I will be making a separate video going in depth on how to use the Arankar Murasama to its fullest potential and avoid getting punished for using it. But in any case, I'll catch you guys in the next one. See ya.